What's going on, you guys? My name's Ty Knots, and welcome to Top 5 Unknowns. 5 terrifying 3 a.m. stories from Reddit. Number 5. This happened during the summer of 2017. Every weekday, I would wake up early for a morning workout, then head to my job. I drive most of the time on a main interstate before turning off into a smaller highway which I would use for a mile or so. So I pull off the main highway right as the 3 cars from the westbound side are entering. One was some sort of orange sports car and the other were identical gray sedans. One was in the front of the orange car and one was behind. These guys were going at least 80 miles per hour. The orange car would change lanes and the car in front would cut him off while the one behind would change lanes to remain behind him. They kept this up the entire time I was on the highway near them, weaving in and out of cars, never slowing down. They rode on the highway beside me for what seemed like forever, maintaining their speed. No matter how fast I went, they were there. No matter how slow I went, they were also there. It could be a complete coincidence, but with how early it was in the morning and with how few cars there were on the interstate, I'm not so sure. Thankfully, as I took my exit, they kept driving down the highway out of sight. I've never seen them again and thank the heavens every day for that. Number 4. My husband and I are amateur mushroom hunters. 3 seasons out of the year, we spend weekends in forest, along nature trails and rivers looking for edible and interesting wild mushrooms to harvest. Springtime begins the most exciting hunt, which is for the highly coveted morels. We typically begin our hunts around 3 a.m. or so in the morning and then continue hunting until daylight. We know of a special stretch of shoreline along a river that has a few dozen morels each year. It's difficult to get to as it's off of a proper path and you have to do quite a bit of ducking, climbing, and maneuvering to get through. Well, one day 2 years ago, we were doing just that, making our way slowly and searching carefully for the mushrooms hiding in plain sight. We were so preoccupied with our task that we didn't know how long we were being watched or followed. But at one point we saw a man up ahead of us, looking at us and not saying anything or even moving, almost as if he was wanting us to notice him. We were near the end of where we wanted to look anyway, so we turned around and started working our way back. When we looked behind us a few moments later, the man was completely gone. We continued looking over the spots we'd already covered in case we missed anything, with me in front and my husband right behind me looking back every few paces because we were feeling paranoid. Well, all of a sudden, I look up from the ground at my feet and the man is blocking our path, maybe 30 feet ahead. He had to have left the riverbank and crept up alongside us on the path, getting ahead of us in order to cut us off on the pass like that. I whip around with huge eyes and just look at my husband, who looks over my shoulder, sees him, and starts to move up the hill to our right, grabbing my hand and pulling me with him. Adrenaline shot both of us out of the thick brush and onto the paved path in an open park moments later. Without speaking, we broke into a sprint running towards the direction of our car, which was several blocks away. When we were far enough away from the riverbank to risk a backwards glance, we saw the man emerge from the brush. He just stood there watching us leave, completely motionless. We speculated the entire ride home what he may have wanted from us, knowing it was nothing innocent. To this day, it still bothers me, and I wonder what would have happened if we'd been spread any further apart, or if either of us had somehow been alone. Number 3. So I met a guy online recently that seemed sweet and kind. I decided to set up a date on a Friday and everything was going well. That is, until yesterday. I got a message telling me that he wanted to hang out tomorrow morning, so I agreed, thinking that we'd just go out for Starbucks and have a good time. So I go to sleep with a smile on my face. Instead, I wake up to a phone call around 3 a.m. Surprised, I answer it and it's my date. He says, "Hey, are you awake?" I respond, "Not really." He responds, "Well, I don't care how you look. Also, your mom freaked me out." I ask, "My mom?" He responds, "Yeah, she saw me parked across from your house. She waved and I waved back. She was kind of creepy." I then ask, "What time did you get here?" He responds, "About 3 hours ago." My heart sinks. I had no idea that someone I was casually meeting for coffee would show up super early to my house and wait for me to wake up. After the phone call, I then checked my messages to see that he'd been messaging me over and over again for the last few hours. One was even a picture of my house. Somehow, I convinced myself to go outside and confront this guy. As soon as I step out the door, he yells, "Hey princess, how are you?" I noticed he was coming from my neighbor's lawn, probably trying to look through their windows. Shaking, I try to fake a smile and let him hug me. He then goes in for a kiss, wet, messy, and with tongue. I felt frozen on what to do, but I try to see things from his perspective and shake it off. So I go off into his car, and he and I try to have something close to a regular date. I managed to convince him later on to drop me off away from my home and let me walk back to my house. Soon after this, I then realized that he'd been following me in his car the entire time. When I asked him about it, he then asked if I wanted him to walk me back to my house. I told him no, got even more scared, and managed to escape and run home. By the time I arrived home, I was in tears and extremely shaky. I then texted him that we're clearly not compatible and I never wanted to come near me or my family again, and thankfully I haven't seen him again since. Number 2. I live right on the southwest coast in England, and around 200 meters from my front door there's a small beach with a tidal pool. Seeing as we currently have a heat wave here, I thought today would be a lovely day for a quick swim before my son wakes up for school. So with my husband and son in their respective beds, I go out early in the morning for a nice swim. All was well, and I managed to do a few laps in the delightfully chilly water in peace. That is, until I heard a man shout good morning. Now, where I live, that's a common occurrence, so I searched for the source of the voice and waved. He then asked, "How is it?" I responded that it was refreshing and a bit cold, and that was that. I carried on with my swim. Well, about 2 minutes later, the man decided to descend the 20 steps down to the pool with his towel in hand. I assumed he'd be swimming too, but he just stood there at the only exit of the pool watching me. If I wanted to leave, I would have had to have swam over to the steps directly behind him. So after a little small talk about the weather and him telling me his name, John says that he normally comes down once a week with his friends, but his friends couldn't make it today. He then looked me straight in the eye and said, "I would join you, but I don't have my swimsuit." This is a slightly odd thing to mention, but I thought that he may have just been a skinny dipper, as that's not too uncommon here. Then, to my horror, he put his hand down the front of his pants and started playing with himself. I must have looked absolutely horrified. He then asked about my husband. I responded that my husband was at home looking after our son before school and that I should probably get going. I obviously looked visibly uncomfortable because he then started to walk back up the steps, but not before shouting, "I'll see you tomorrow then." He didn't see me tomorrow. Number 1. I was 12 years old at the time that this took place, and my older sister and I were home alone for the weekend. We stayed up late into the early morning hours when suddenly we heard a knock at the door. A man was standing there with a clipboard and said that he needed to check our gas meter, stating that it was upstairs. Being young and naive, I told him sure and let him inside. I didn't notice at the time, but he wasn't dressed like a city official at all. He had on a green and purple shirt with bold stripes, kind of like the host of Blue's Clues. He came in and immediately went up the stairs to our bedrooms and walked in the first open door that he saw. Thankfully, my sister came down the stairs at almost that exact same moment. She asked who the guy was, and I told her that he was here to read the gas meter. Her face instantly turned white and she flung open the front door and dragged me outside. She told me our gas meters are outside. We both began to panic, and neither of us had a cell phone as this took place in the 1960s, but obviously we weren't going back in the house to call the authorities on the landline. Then my ever so resourceful sister had a stroke of genius. A man was walking right by our house at this exact moment, so she motioned for him to come over. She then yelled loudly into the house, "Oh Dad, it's good that you're home. A man from the city is here to read the gas meters upstairs." And just like she'd hoped, this man from the street yelled, "What are you talking about?" The man in the striped shirt then bolted out of the house. The man in the street then asked us repeatedly if we were okay and if we needed him to stay with us until our parents got home. He was extremely sweet. We were so startled that we barely even thanked him before slamming and locking the doors and windows. As irate as my sister was that I'd let someone in the house, she begged me not to tell the authorities or our parents because they'd left her in charge and she was afraid she'd get in trouble. I didn't want to catch any heat from them either, so I agreed. Well, 3 weeks later, a girl in our community went missing. Same MO. She was home alone and the authorities found the door open with no signs of a forced entry. My sister and I then discussed our options, but deep down that we had no choice but to come clean. We told the police everything, and I don't know if it ever helped, but they did tell us that they had reason to believe it was likely the same man. They also tracked down the man who helped us on the street, and it turns out that we already knew him, and he worked for a local butcher shop. We just didn't recognize him at the time. He was lifelong friends with our family after that. After coming clean to our parents, they were absolutely mortified. They weren't all too angry with us and more glad that we were okay, though they did review all the rules of caution and didn't leave us home alone for quite some time. Police finally found the missing girl months later, though they said that she'd been held for a few days captive and then burned alive. They never caught the man who did it. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep updated with our videos.